October 29th, 2024. This is the Arlington County Board of Equalization hearing. There are 5 cases on the agenda and there are 6 board members present. Mr. Hoffman is not with us today. There is a quorum. This first case on the agenda is RPC 14053-062 at 800 North Glebe Road. Mr. Warren, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? I had my mic down.
We can. Yes, sir.
Okay. Before I start, we during the course of our review and after filing the appeal, we are revising our requested value to $113,679,500. So this is the property at 800 North Glebe Road. It's consistent of 1 tax RPC. It's currently assessed, or was initially assessed at $181,434,000, which is $603 a square foot. Following or prior to the board hearing, the county is recommending a value of $154,006,800. This property was originally built in 2012. It's 301,000 square feet of leasable office and is 11 stories and sits in the Ballston submarket. I'd like to direct the board's attention now to the summary sheet, the county's I&E summary sheet that can be found, I believe, on page 4. And you'll see that the columns A, B, C, and E, we provided the last 4 years of income and expense surveys and operations at the property. Following the revision, which puts that $154 million value that the county is now recommending, puts the property's value at $505 a square foot. One of the major issues that's still with regard that we take issue with regard to column F, which is the county's revision column, is with regard to the vacancy. So this is not the first case this year that we've come before the board citing the vacancy that the county is estimating in the revision column differs from what was actually submitted in the certified income and expense survey statement and the rent roll that was provided. On column or on page 3, which is their summary analysis, they do actually cite the correct vacant square footage as of 1/1/2024 of 64,486 square feet. And if you look at column F, you'll see that their vacant square footage that they lease up at $38 a square foot assumes 63,092 square feet of vacant office space, which is accurate. However, that vacancy of 63,000 calculates to 21% vacant office space as of 1/1/2024. The county, and based on those guidelines, they should revert to using a 23% vacancy rate. However, in their revised column, they're using 18%. So they cite that there is actually 63,000 square feet of vacant office and lease it up, but then don't follow their guidelines and use 18% vacancy rate, which is, again, out of equalization with other office properties in the area that have a vacancy rate of 21% as of the valuation date, which this one does. You can see in column F right below the total square footage or the net leasable area of 305,000, they list a total vacancy square footage of 52,712. So that calculates to 17%, and that's how they're then justifying the use of an 18% vacancy rate. That 52,712 square feet is per CoStar. Again, this is not the only time that this year that the county has supported a CoStar vacancy rate and gone against the actual vacancy rate that's listed on the rent roll that was supplied with the 1/1 certified rent roll. In addition to that, so suites 500 and 600, you'll see, and it's on the rent roll, included in our appeal package, are completely vacant as of 1/1/2023. In addition to that, suites 900, which was the Willis Tower, and included a total of 20, excuse me, 27,872 square feet. They signed an early termination on June 30th of this year. So that space is now completely vacant. In addition, Suite 800, which is currently being subleased, Volent Health is the tenant. It's being subleased out currently to CACI. They will vacate 27,813 square feet on Suite 800 as of December. So as of 1/1/2024, the expected vacancy the following year was going to increase from 21% to now 40%. There is no, I mean, there should be no argument about that. The vacancy is what it is, and we would strongly urge the board to follow their own guidelines within uniformity and equalization and apply the correct vacancy rate. In addition, you'll see in the county's revised column that they have revised their pass-through and other income from 4.9 million to 4.255 million, which is the actual pass-throughs that were reported in the year-end 2023 income statement. Our analysis used a pass-through and total other income of 3.6 million, which is the actual other pass-throughs that were calculated. If you look at the additional CAM pass-throughs that are indicated on the 1/1/2024 rent roll that was submitted. So it's still roughly a difference of approximately $500,000 there. And that's going to make up the main difference here and why this value in this property is still at $505 a square foot. There are no recent sales to support a current assessment of $505 a square foot. The 2 Liberty Center office building just recently transacted on September 11th for $27.6 million, which is $155 a square foot. The Ballston 1 office sold in the end of August of 2023 for $25 million. That property is located at 4601 Fairfax Drive at $100 a square foot. There is no justification or sales to justify a $505 a square foot building that is going to be 40% vacant prior to the end of the year. With that, I'm open to questions and happy to answer any additional questions the board has. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Yes, thank you. For this case, we did find in our review that the most recent I&E stated the 65,091 square feet, as Mr. Warren stated. What we did also find is the listing for those particular suites that were indicated as vacant in the 2023 rent roll were not listed. In particular, suite 500 was not listed, and that accounts for 33,972 square feet. Mr. Warren did send some additional information last night, about 4:30 last night, to indicate Volent Health had amended their lease, and that's where you see the contraction. If you pay attention to page 7 of 139, you'll see that I indicated for vacant suites 500 and 600, Evolvent was in the in those suites. In the lease, prior to this amendment, they had a lease that extended out to 2032. And in this supporting documents that was submitted yesterday or sent to me yesterday, they also indicated that there was a termination fee to be paid in an amount of 6.5 million. And there was an action date to be of October 1st, 2023, where they were to pay half of that. And looking at the I&E, I didn't see that indicated as income or a termination fee included in that 2023 I&E. Not sure if it never fully transacted. I know and can attest that it was signed. At the same time, we see that what was included in the BOE packet that some of the space that Evolvent had was subleased to other tenants. We do see that there was a space from, I believe the name is, one second, Recorded Future was a sublease of Evolvent. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Willis Tower was a sublease as well. And in that supporting documents, it did read that once Evolvent terminated their lease, that the owner would find space similar to the space that they were subleasing in the building. So in addition to that, when looking at and cross-referencing CoStar with the rent roll again, only 29,717 square feet was available. Actually, 29,017 square feet was not available until January 2025. And so that would leave the residual of vacancy of about 7.7%. And the county found that in the original assessment, and you'll see in column D that we have about 8% vacancy. And that's just when the county valued this property, we did see in CoStar that that amount of space was available. So therefore we used the 8%. When looking under the review, we try to give the benefit of the doubt. We try to maximize exactly what CoStar was saying, 52,712 square feet. That amounted to about 17% square feet in vacancy. And therefore, in the test, in column F, the county used the 52,712. I guess had we had the other supporting documents, we probably would change the income approach a bit to account for that 6.5 million in termination fees, and look at this a little differently. But for the board today, we are putting forth the revision, column F. As you see, column F's NOI, how it compares to what the county reconstructed. Perhaps maybe the half payment due October 1st of 3.25 million could have closed that gap, and perhaps we probably wouldn't submit a revision given that new information. But we do stand by the revision that we did put forward and offer to the appellant, and we're open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? Mr. Matzkin.
For the department, go over, I heard towards the end of your 8 minutes that you stand by the 52,000 or so figure vacancy for a variety of reasons based on what you knew at the time. But nonetheless, you value the vacant space in column F at 63,000 plus. Why wouldn't that be the 52,000?
I did that just to keep it in line with how it was reported, but then gave the vacancy deduction below the line by including only 63,000 versus the increase if it were to go to 6591. We're valuing the new lease, or the new leases, at a higher per square foot rate than the leases in place. So that would only increase the income if we were to move up that vacancy square footage to 6591. Part of that, I believe, is retail space and storage space to equal 65,091 square feet.
And why, following up on what you just said, why would you value vacant space higher than existing rental square footage space?
We pretty much matched what the appellant was stating.
the newest leases were higher than what was existing? The value of per square foot of newer leases is higher? Because that was one thing that I flagged, that it was in column F, it's just a tad that it was higher, $35 and change versus 38. That seemed impossible to me in this environment, but you're saying that's a real good estimate based on what you know from the appellant, the $38 per square foot value, right?
Right.
Yeah, you stand by that. Last question. Um, you mentioned something, the co-star. I didn't write it down. It was, let me conjure it up again. I'm sorry. Perhaps somebody else will have a question while I ruminate.
Okay, other questions? Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, this is for Rob. I'm trying to kind of understand if a lease termination fee is paid, isn't that in lieu of rent? So if you're going to add the lease termination fee to the income and then assume that the vacated space is still rented, isn't that kind of a double count?
No, not assuming that it is rented, but the fee itself in lieu of rent, we would in prior cases we added it below the line. So not to say that it's being capped into the future as income being received, but it's sort of a one-time bump to kind of indicate that that termination fee was there.
It isn't to follow up, isn't a termination fee kind of like a capital improvement? Like a capital improvement, which increases the value, we don't count that as an expense. So wouldn't a termination fee be treated kind of the same? I'm not giving you a hard time. I'm honestly trying to understand.
Right. No, I wouldn't equate it to a capital improvement. I think it is income that should have been reported had it been received. So I don't know that we have ever included it as a capital improvement. I don't understand the relation there.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Matskin again?
Thank you, Barnes. That's the direction I was going, that I flew out of my brain for a moment. On the termination fees, where is that shown, or how is it accounted for in your revision? Because you said normally be below the line, but there are no below the line numbers in this case because the vacancy isn't high enough to do that.
What I was saying that it was the information that was submitted to me yesterday in an email. And had I had the information, I would probably look at it a little differently.
Oh, so it's not accounted for anywhere because you just found it out. Okay, great answer. That's clear. Thank you.
Right, I just want to clarify, but now having had the information, Mr. Peralta, are you saying that you just don't want to consider it?
Having had the information, I would ask probably follow-up questions to that. Again, that termination fee would have been included in the 2023 INE had that termination actually happened, because that was one of the stipulations. And unfortunately, we're not able to look at it unless Blake is able to show the board. But as of October 1st, 2023, they were supposed to pay half of that amount, half of that 6.5 million to I guess exercise the termination fee. I guess Blake can speak to that more.
Well, did you do any due diligence to reach out to Mr. Warren yesterday prior to the hearing?
It was at 4:30. No, I didn't think anything could be resolved, and I did try to work it up. I'm not sure. The other follow-up questions would be, is that why was that termination fee not included in the 2023 INE? And then recorded future was not part of the rent roll. I'm not sure why that wasn't included in the rent roll if they're subleasing space. I would like to see, I guess, that rent roll or that sublease and the other sublease as well. So there's more questions to be added to it. I'm not saying that anything was done, last minute. We do ask in the I&Es every year, is any tenant leaving the property? And in 2020 to 2023, there's no indication, though, that actual
Okay.
question was left blank.
All right, Mr. Warren, do you want to respond to why that wasn't included?
Why, what wasn't included? There's a lot of questions. I have a lot of responses.
Okay, well, go
So,
ahead on the first one. Why wasn't it included in the I&E?
Why the one-time termination fee?
Uh-huh.
Because it's considered, it's not considered annual operating income. It can't be expected year over year. You're collecting, or you'd be reporting a lump sum over the term of the lease that extends to like a 2032 term date.
Right, well, would you consider that space vacant then?
Yes. The sublease for the recorded future. Yes,
Mhm.
they were out by 12/30. There was an agreement, but if you look back at that amendment statement, it says that not just that they would find new space in that building, but any other building owned by this tenant, and that's what they did. They're not in this building right now. What was reported on that I&E survey in the rent roll is exactly what the vacancy was as of 1/1/2023, and it's only gotten higher since to date. So it's 21% as of
Right,
1/1/2024.
but we're still not, but we're not taking into account the fee that they paid, the cancellation fee.
Okay, well, I mean, even if you, I mean, they reported NOI of like $6 million this year.
Mhm.
Again, I don't think you should be taking a one-term fee that extends out through a 2032 term date. You're collecting the income or a one-time termination fee for the entire term of the lease, not just
Right, I
income that was
understand.
collected for. And that's
Okay.
why it wasn't reported. Similar to, yes, CapEx, because it's not annual expected operating expenses. We wouldn't report CapEx items in.
Okay. All right,
in
I think
survey.
we're gonna leave the rest of that to our discussion, but okay, Mr. Yates.
Blake, what you're saying though is the sublets were not there
No,
on January.
Nope.
All the space was empty that we were just talking about.
Yep, all the
Right.
space was empty. I mean, what is listed as vacant there, and it's very clear on the I&E survey, is Suite 500 and 600 were completely vacant. If it was occupied by a subtenant, we would have kept that in there. Similar to what's in there for Suite 800. You'll see Suite 800, it's under Evolent. That's still in there as the as of 1/1/2024 in the rent roll that was submitted, because the subtenant Evolent was not in space Suite 100, but they were subleasing that to CACI. So that's listed in there as occupied. There are no subtenants for 500 and 600 in there. What is listed and what we reported as the vacancy is the true vacancy. Regarding like information and how all this came about, I reached out when we got back this response and was very questionable about why the county was using an 18% vacancy and not 23 based off of the vacancy that was submitted. And I reached out at the beginning of last week on Monday and have been trying to have discussions about this since. And the county's response was, well, we're not sure about 500 and 600. CoStar shows it as potentially vacant. And, we thought the lease termination fee was for 500, and that doesn't happen until March of 2024. So they were thinking that the termination notice that we supplied in the package, which was for Suite 800 for the CICI tenant, sublease tenant, was actually for one of the suites 500 or 600. So I reached out and said, no, that is absolutely not the case. I thought it was very clear that 500 and 600 were completely vacant, but was able to attain a amendment to this fifth amendment to the lease, which indicated the contraction of Evolent and 500 and 600 being completely vacant as of 1/1, to make no confusion about it.
Okay.
All right, other questions? All right, Mr. Peltz, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, I guess to put things in perspective, if a new purchaser purchases property as of the first of the year, would they expect that payment, that termination fee payment, in lieu of this tenant leaving? And the answer, I believe, would be yes. they would expect the 6.5 million to be paid to them as a new owner for this termination. The email transfer that transpired between Blake and I after we gave the reduction didn't wasn't exactly how Mr. Warren stated it. I simply asked, was there any new, I guess, amendments or terminations prior to the first of the year in order for me to, take action as far as, what was available as of the first of the year. Again, CoStar states that only 23,000 or so square feet is available as of the first of the year. 29,017 square feet is not available till 2025. So that would bring it back to the 8% as the original assessment. The county gave 18% in lieu of, any
Time is up.
discussion about that vacancy. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Warren, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Again, we are relying on the certified rent roll that was submitted that states the actual vacancy as of 1/1/2024. The county is very strict with their guidelines and how they apply these vacancy rates. And as of the valuation date, this property was 21% vacant and should have a 23% vacancy rate applied to it per the county guidelines. There is no evidence to suggest that the vacancy is anything other than what it actually was and what we're indicating in the submission in the rent roll. Again, the county is relying on CoStar and not the certified submission of the owner themselves in this case. This property, again, the revision is at $505 a square foot. There is nothing that's transacted in this market at that level, especially for a property that's experiencing increased vacancy, and the vacancy is rising as we speak on this property. Suite 800 and 900 will be vacant. That's 2 whole floors as of 1/1/2025. That's a fact, and we included that in our submission package as well. The main retail tenant has had to negotiate rent down from $48 a square foot to $38 a square foot. Again, we please stress to the county that they or the board that they rely on the actual vacancy that's being reported and not assumptions that are being pulled from CoStar. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry. All right, it's just among the board. Where's everybody on this? Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, I'm going to share that I looked up on an income approach in an appraisal using the income approach. Do you consider a lease termination fee? What it says is that the capitalization method assumes all income and expenses that go into the NOI are current and perpetual. And it says never include one-time or temporary income or expenses, such as lease termination fees, temporary tax incentives, interestingly enough, lease-up concessions, etc. So I just thought I'd share that as we begin our discussion.
Okay, again, I'll ask, where are people on this?
Well, I'll go ahead and share
Mr.
something.
Lawson?
Yeah, I apologize. I'll go ahead and share something I did. And I did this the other day. What I changed in column F was the figure for the GPI, and I lowered that to the operating year. And then I upped the vacancy from 18 to the 25. I ended up at 139,811,900. And I'm not necessarily saying that's where I want to go, but I did do that just to kind of see what it resulted in. I'll see what other people think.
Okay. Mr. Metzgen?
I did a limited, turns out I changed some other things that I now need to undo, but I upped it to 23%, not the 25 that Barnes said, unless he misspoke. Because as I've said a number of times, CoStar is only as good as the input that it receives from the property owner or property owner's agent. And I'm never quite sure whether the department's looking at CoStar exactly on 1/1 of the valuation year or not. And in theory, I guess the property owners stands to be sanctioned if they fudge on their, among other things, vacancy announcement. So I take a vacancy description. So I tend to take that seriously, absent any real challenge. And I have to redo the numbers, but I would come out to a figure in the high 140s if I got to the 23% figure. And if anybody wants to support that, I would certainly run those numbers.
Okay, Mr. Mendez?
Yeah, I did exactly what Ken did. I just took column F and I bumped up the vacancy to 23%, and I came out to 141,805,600.
All right, Mr. Penaranda?
Yeah, I worked out on two numbers. Well, the thing is that when you're taking the 23%, I think you're taking the 23% out of the gross potential income, which shouldn't be. I think it's less than that. We only need to take it from the
Right, the office retail spaces.
office retail and all that, not necessarily from the whole gross potential income. So I come up with a higher number, taking the 23%. And I also did with 21%, which is what Mr. Warren testified that was vacant as of the beginning of the year. So I have those two figures. Using 23% on column F would bring the value down to 146,340,522. And if we use what was testified at 21% instead of the 18, it would bring it down to 149,407.47 dollars. So that would be rounded.
Mr. Yates?
That's where I was going to. Exactly, the 149.
With 21%?
Yes. I did not include anything for the pass-through issue. I left that the same.
All right, Mr. Matskin?
To clarification, don't the guidelines say, excuse me, if it were in this case 21%, the guidelines suggest it would be 23 and not the actual 21. We have different stair steps.
Mm.
Isn't the 23 therefore appropriate in this case? Anybody have the guidelines in front of them?
They did. I just closed them.
I mean, that was argued a couple of times, and that's what I went by.
Yeah, I did both calculations based on the difference on the income that we're also disputing, whether the termination fees should be used as income or not. And that's where, I come up with not necessarily going to the guidelines itself. I think that would be disregarding the additional income.
Yeah, I think should disregard it. And I think Barnes has proved that. So Jose, what do you believe more, 21 or 23 or something else?
I was leaning more towards 21.
And why?
Because that's what was testified as being the vacancy. They had a 21.3. That's 21.
So nobody's found that bump up in the guidelines for the range to go to automatically 23 if it's 21 or 25, as an example.
I'm looking.
Well, I don't know. I guess where I'm struggling, we're at the 11th hour. There's a lot of questions that haven't been answered. A lot of information that's just going back and forth at the last minute. I understand what Mr. Lawson is saying from the definition, but I still think that there is some value to that $6.5 million of the fee, and just to disregard. So I would lean more towards the 21.
I can live with that.
Yeah, Mr. Mendez, where are you?
Yeah, I could go with the 21 as well.
Mr. Yates?
I'll go with it.
Okay, all right. Mr.
I'm 21, but what Ken is saying is correct. In the overall office vacancy is rounded to 23, and information collected from the 2024
assessment supported increases the vacancy. Yeah, yes, but I looked at the 21.
All right, Mr. Penaranda,
Sure, I'll go ahead and move that we reduce the assessment to 149,407,000 even, based on increasing the vacancy to 21% on the reconstructed numbers.
okay, do we have a second? Mr. Yates, all in favor? Aye, opposed? Okay, it is unanimous. The assessment's reduced to 149,407,000 even, based on increasing the vacancy to 21% on the test column. Thank you, Mr. Warren.
Thank you all. I think this is my last time here, so
That's it. We will see you next year.
happy holidays. Yep, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, do we have Mr. Harmon?
Good morning.
There we go. Okay, the next case on the agenda is RPC 34027-583, 2733 Crystal Drive. I understand late last afternoon that you asked to have this case withdrawal. Is that accurate, Mr. Harmon?
That's accurate.
Okay, and I assume no objections, Mr. Peralta?
No objections for my last case.
All righty, I will move to accept the withdrawal of Mr. Peralta's last case. Do I have a second? Mr. Lawson, all in favor? Aye, opposed. Okay, the withdrawal has been accepted. Thank you, Mr. Peralta. You may be excused.
Thank
And do
you.
we have Ms. Roskind? There we go. Okay, next on the agenda is RPC 1403502G at 671 North Glebe Road. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Yes, thank you. Madam Chairwoman, members of the board, Lori, good morning. This is the Ballston Quarter Mall and the offices above the mall. I assume we're all pretty familiar with this property. It was, of course, renovated just prior to the pandemic and has since failed to achieve the potential once envisioned. The county's revised assessment is essentially right at the value set by the board for this property last year. Now, I appreciate Lori taking the time to review this case and revise the assessment as she has. However, there is only one issue we dispute with the recommended revision from the county. That is the termination fee income that's included as capitalized income in the county's revision on row 7 of column F. Now, before I get to the termination fee income, I do want to discuss the overall context of this property as it existed on the date of value January 1, 2024, knowing that the county's recommended value is right at the 2023 value. I think it's pertinent to ask the question, is this property in the same position it was 1 year prior, or is it better off or worse off? Well, the answer to that question is this property is decidedly worse off than it was 1 year prior for multiple reasons. Primarily, the Macy's that abuts this property was closed in early 2024 and began liquidating shortly after the first of the year. This was all known as of the date of value. While Macy's is under separate ownership, it's on a separate parcel. It is, for all intents and purposes, the Ballston Quarter Mall's only anchor tenant. In fact, I'm sure you're familiar, the Macy's actually opens up, it connects to the Ballston Quarter and provides access from the west side of the building. Typically, malls rely heavily on anchor tenants to drive traffic to the inline retail, and when anchors close, it creates a hardship for the other retailers at the mall. This is what has happened with this property, with the lone anchor tenant closing early in 2024. So Macy's closing hurts the mall overall in terms of foot traffic generation, but it also creates further hardship on the Ballston Quarter Mall because it effectively closes access to the mall from the west side of the building. Additionally, as we're all aware, Macy's is slated for redevelopment, which means that any potential buyer would view the mall as having not only limited access, no anchor tenants, but as having an active construction site abutting your building for the next few years, which will, of course, further impede foot traffic and further impact the mall as time goes on. Second reason this property is not as well positioned as 1 year prior, NOI declined from 2022 to 2023, as you can see on the county's test page. Third, this property was worse off again January 1, 2024 than 1 year prior because vacancy increased year over year. So the revised recommendation values this property as the same as 1 year prior, yet it is, again, decidedly worse off, primarily due to that only anchor tenant, the Macy's closing, which was well-known, well-publicized as of the first of the year. That, of course, drives out the lone anchor tenant. It also blocks access from one whole side of the property. Primary access remaining for this property is the north and south sides of the building. Looking at the county's revised assessment in column F, I again only want to focus on the termination fee income that was included and capitalized into the final value on the revision. The county's figures for rental rates, expenses, they're close enough. I only want to focus on the termination fee income. We don't take issue with the other items, not that we necessarily, endorse them, but the only issue we want to discuss is the termination fee income. So that's on row 7 of column F, where you can see $945,000 is listed as miscellaneous income. This is what the owner reported separately on the 2023 I&E survey as termination fee income. This was very purposefully separated out by the owner and specifically listed as termination fee income by the owner on that I&E survey to make it clear that this is not recurring revenue. This is income that will not be paid going forward. Now you can see that by looking at the appropriate page of the 2023 I&E. That's on page 111 of the appeal. Here you'll see the owner again made a very specific, purposeful method of reporting that separately to distinguish it from recurring revenues such as rent and true miscellaneous other income. This is, again, one-time income that the owner separated out to make clear it will not be repeated going forward. Termination fee income, there was some discussion in the last case, but it is income that a tenant pays the owner in order to end their lease prior to the lease end date. As such, this income is not repeatable going forward and should not be capitalized as if it is going to continue into perpetuity, which is what the county's recommendation has proposed. In this case, 3 tenants paid early termination fees in 2023. Once these fees were paid, any relationship between the owner and those tenants was over. There was no more income expected or due from these tenants. There was no more contractual relationship between the owner and these tenants. There's no more termination fee income expected from those tenants. That space has been listed as vacant and income has been imputed on it on the county's revision. By capitalizing that early termination fee income, the revised recommendation assumes these tenants who again ended their relationship with this property in 2023, that the revised assessment assumes they'll continue to pay termination fee income in 2024 and beyond. This is not the case at all. As such, the $945,703 listed on row 7 of the county's revision in column F should be removed. Looking at this property as what would a willing buyer pay as of January 1, 2024, a willing buyer would not include prior year's termination fees that were paid in 2023 and were known not to be paid again anytime after January 1, 2024. Now, we just heard Mr. Peralta state on the prior case in regards to termination fee that the question is, would a buyer expect to receive this income as of the first of the year? In this case, the answer is no. A buyer would not expect to receive this income as of January 1, 2024. As a note, the county's 2023 reconstruction in column E2 does add this termination fee income to the reported regular income. Again, that's contrary to what the owner reported it as, but that's the only difference between the 2023 column and the reconstruction is the inclusion of that termination fee income. So a market buyer would not capitalize fee income that was paid in a prior year and not going to be repeated going forward. The board did hear a similar property earlier this year where a tenant had paid termination fees in prior years with no outstanding termination fees as of the first of the year. In that case, the board elected to include half of the previously paid termination fee as income below the line, but did not capitalize the fee income because it would not be repeated. In this case, that same rationale would remove the $945,000 from row 7 of column F and add $472,852 as a below the line addition. Finally, I believe this is my last case before the board this year, so I'd just like to sincerely thank the board members for your service to our county, and the diligence and acumen with which you have heard our cases. I know this is not anybody's primary job, and I really do appreciate your all's time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Roskin for the county, please.
Thank you, board. So as we've heard that the renovations for this particular property, they concluded between 2018 and 2019, which was before COVID. And they've had a fairly long time to fill these spaces up. And we looked at that. That was what column F is. I heavily discounted the rent. I did it a little different than I normally would. Usually I look at the rent roll and I determine, okay, what is the average rent? All right. And then I go, okay, let's discount this based on a 1-year lease. You'd give 1 month free rent. You come up with like 0.0833, you discount it that way. I actually did it a little different because of the excess vacancy. If you note my note 3 in this summary, what I ended up doing was discounting even further than that. Some of them quite heavily. For example, the inline, I discounted that $13 based off of the average rent that was developed. The restaurant, that was discounted $12, excuse me, $12 off of the average rent. So I heavily discounted those, looking at, yes, they're having some trouble renting some of these spaces. And I did ask several times for information on the office space, and it was never given. It's included in the email. If you want to look, page 76, I believe it was 76. No, I'm sorry, not 76, but I did include it in the email where I requested information for that office. It's actually page 53. My apologies. I asked, that was the second time that I asked for information on the new office tenant. And that was asked back August 8th. They finally responded September 30th. Okay. What is that, 6 weeks? And they still couldn't respond to it. They said they'd have to ask somebody else. So I relied on the agent's number. I used their number for office. I took the $32 a square foot. I was being generous there. There is support for a much higher number than that for brand new office space in that market there. So I used their number. And as for the termination fee, which I realize the agent mentioned it like multiple times, I do consider that like a one-time income. I treat it like it's the miscellaneous, because there are times in the mall, they'll have certain vendors. I've even found it in some of the other strip centers, where they'll have like at Christmas time, they'll have some extra vendors come out, and it's kind of like a one-time thing, but it's still revenue. It was revenue that the owner received. It's not imaginary money. And that's why it was included under miscellaneous. Excuse me. And then when you go further down the column for column F, I looked at the expenses that they reported. And if you notice, I'm pretty darn close to what they reported for their expenses. And it came in, the value came in at 78 million. We also looked at using the rent loss, TIs, and leasing commission adjustment after the cap rate. That resulted in a value of 91 million. Yes, we are going with column F, the 78 million. But the other way of looking at this excess vacancy is to use, to calculate the rent loss, tenant improvements and leasing commissions after the cap rate. And like I said, that resulted in a $91 million value. And that's pretty much it that I have for the moment. I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, this is for Jordan. Jordan, how many tenants paid a termination fee? You said it was 2?
There were 3 in 2020.
3? Do you recollect who they were?
I do have that up. Let me see. So it was Belong Gaming, District Donut Ballston, and Eden Health.
Okay, were those the ones downstairs?
I don't believe so. District Donut, I believe, was downstairs.
That was downstairs, yeah.
Belong Gaming and Eden Health, I'm not certain, but I'm pretty sure just from having spent time there that they were not downstairs.
Well, is the church still there?
Yes.
And what do they pay?
Minimal.
They pay got it here, just let me get it for you. They pay $20 a foot.
And is their space exclusive to them or is it shared?
As far as I know, it's exclusive.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Metzgen.
First, for the appellant, you had cited a case that we saw earlier this season, and we split the value of the termination fee for another property and then half of it below the line. In this case, all the money was provided, and you suggested that that's what we ought to do here. Eliminate the 900,000 plus, but add it below the line. But in this case, all the termination fees were paid before the date of value. So I was thinking that no, the entire termination fee value, 900 plus thousand, ought to be eliminated, and that's it. Have I missed something?
No, you have it right, Mr. Metzgen. That's exactly how I believe it should be valued. That's how I believe a buyer would value it. Yes. Okay, great. Not just because I was surprised when you suggested maybe we ought to add it back in later. For the department, in page 2 of the packet, talks about a 16.8% vacancy. And in your revision in F, you calculate it all at a 9%. Is that the bandwidth? 16.8 reverts to 9 per the guidelines? Is that why you did that?
I didn't. That they used. Okay, so we used a stabilized vacancy rate of 9, but I went further to account for that excess vacancy. I lowered the rents to account for that excess vacancy.
Okay, good. That was going to be my next question. You had mentioned before you lowered the rent because just in general, things aren't going so well there. And I can't, in E1 and E2, of course, they don't break out most of the rents, the theater and so forth. They just have a lump sum. So I just go to the bottom, what is it, the GPI in, for instance, the reconstructed E2, versus F, the EGI, I said GPI, I meant EGI, is much higher in your F than it was in your reconstruction, but you were saying rents have all been lowered. How can the EGI be higher when the rents are lower? There's something in here I'm not seeing, obviously.
So basically, the only thing that I reconstructed in there was a bad debt that they reported. In the original INE, they left the bad debt out, as you can see in column E1. Okay, and so when I they didn't include it in their revenue. Okay, so you add that into their revenue and then you subtract it. That's what was changed above there for their rents versus that bad debt. And then their pass-through, that was based on email conversation.
Well, I see in E2 and F, just for your last statement, pass-throughs are the same. Something is bumping up the EGI in F over your reconstructed. And I
Yeah,
don't know,
it's the pass-through. They're not the same.
I get 9. I have 945, 783. What do you have for both of them? E2 and F.
Okay, E1, it's 2.7.
Oh, they're at
3.9
3.9 versus, 3.9. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't. Pass through was 3 up from the bottom. It's 3.9 million in E2 and in F. I'm having a tough time imagining, just to show my hand, that this is the same, given we have higher cap rates this year than last year, that this property is doing the same, has the same value as last year versus this year. And part of it is because of the Macy's. So I go back to, why is your EGI higher in F than in your reconstruction in E2?
Like I said, it's the pass-through that you see there primarily. And once again, when they filled out the INE, they did not include, they didn't include that bad debt. And so that's what I was representing in that column E2.
I understand you've accounted for that in E2. Sure, I get
Yeah.
that. That's why I'm only comparing E2 and F. I'm not using D or E1.
Oh, so you're asking the difference between E versus F?
Yes, ma'am. E2 and F.
Okay, my apologies. No, oh, E2. That's what I thought I explained.
No,
Okay, all right,
go ahead, Mary.
we're gonna move on. I agree with you, Mr. Matzkin. Okay, other questions? No, Ms. Roskin, if you take a minute to wrap up.
Sure. So in this case, we did include the termination fee. It's treated just like miscellaneous additional income. Now in the rent roll, they are the tenants. They were on the rent roll, but I did not include their rent. Okay. So that's factored in the termination fee. Termination fee falls under miscellaneous. It's treated like any other miscellaneous one time. It could be, it's just like antenna, or if they have kiosks, some one-time fees. That's how it's being treated here. It is income that was actually received by the owner. And once again, I did a test using below the line adjustments. It came out to 91 million. That's using the average rents and discounting at 8.6 million for rent loss, TI, and commission. However, we're going with column F, the 78 million, in which case we used substantially lower rents than was used in the other method. So we believe that the 78,541,900 is a fair assessment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, thank you. So the county recommended revision, the NOI on that column F is 33% higher than what the property actually reported in 2023. A large part of this is primarily due to including that one-time termination fee income where it's not appropriate to do so. We just heard in the prior case from the office appraiser for the county that the question is, what would a potential buyer, would they anticipate receiving that income as of the first of the year? The answer is no. That's already been paid. Those tenants are gone. There is no ongoing relationship between the owner and those tenants that paid those fees. So no buyer would, impute any termination fee income for fees that were received in the prior year. Rent for this space where those tenants did vacate early was included and imputed as vacant space. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. It's just among the board. Mr. Yates.
I looked at this and I hear what Lori's saying concerning miscellaneous income, but I think an owner would bank on having that antenna fee or payment reoccurring, or those kiosks at Christmas is a reoccurring income, but I cannot see them banking on a previous termination fee. I think they pay taxes on it, but that's not the value going forward. And it is in the vacant space.
Okay, Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, Mark, following up on your comment, I don't think a termination fee is comparable to something like a Christmas tree lot or a Halloween lot or, fireworks at 4th of July, because that can continue year after year.
Right.
Also, Jordan talked about the closing of the Macy's. This mall is kind of, I don't know, different. I don't know why. I guess it's smaller, but this is a mall that on a weekend is thriving and active, and buses pull up and unload. And then on weekdays, I go over there and man, it's empty. So I kind of, I guess I second what Ken said, that this just can't have increased in value.
Mr. Manskin?
I agree with the first two comments about removing that termination payment of 900,000 plus. I did find, just for the record, the difference between the EGI E2 and F, and that is that the vacancy amount to be deducted from the GPI is minimal in E1 and E2, but whereas it was given a good accounting by the department, it's much higher. So that's the difference between those. So I revert back to just eliminating the 900,000 plus for the termination payments and come out with a therefore lower valuation. And I've done the, it comes out to 69.5 million or so. And I can defend all of that and give you specific numbers if you wish.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I did. I agree with you, Mr. Manskin. I was kind of lost in the county's explanation of what the difference was when E2 and F. But as Ms. Roskin said, she reconstructed the actuals. And so to me, I took the E2 reconstructed and applied the county's cap rate and got 68,881,700. Because I agree, I don't think it didn't stay the same. I mean, this has lost the anchor tenant, and those are not replaced as easily as just a store on the third floor. Mr. Penaranda?
Yeah, I kind of did the same thing as the previous case because, when I looked at both columns, the reconstructed numbers from the county and the pro forma from the appellant, we're looking at the GPI, which is exactly the same. So I took the 16% vacancy from the reconstructed numbers, not from the gross potential income that the appellant is using, but just from the retail, because the GPI includes the pass-throughs and everything else. So I'm just taking it from the income itself. And by using that 16%, it would bring it down to 71,255,700, which is, in my opinion, a little more reasonable than, considering that the income is not going to be the same and the value is going down.
Just to clarify, you took the 16% not from the reconstructed E2, but from column F, from the test.
Right. I'm sorry, from the test, okay. Yes.
Okay. Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Barnes and Ken about removing the termination fee. So that's really all I did in column F and just kept everything the same. I think others did that as well.
What was your figure?
I got 68,634,100.
That's what I got.
Okay.
All right, so we've got, tell me that number again, 68?
Yes, 68,634,100.
And that was based on doing What?
Solely removing the termination fee, the 945,703 termination fee
From column F.
from column F, yes.
Right, so,
But
but did you, so you didn't capitalize it, but did you add it back in?
I didn't add it back in, no.
No. It's not a reoccurring.
Right, but it is
Yeah.
income. Just like, we said in the last case, 6.5 million, it's still income.
It was income from 2023, but we're talking about the value of 2024.
It's not something we banked on or an owner would look at.
The owner
So-
would look at, there's no further income from that source.
Okay. All right, so on Johnny's number, the 68,634,1. So we got Mr. Lawson. Okay, yeah, well, you got the votes to do it, so. Mr. Mendez,
Sure, I'm gonna move that we reduce the 2024 assessment to 68,634,100 based on removing the termination fee
and that's from column F.
in column F, yes.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
A second.
Mr. Lawson, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so it's 4-2, and that's without myself and Mr. Penaranda. The assessment has been reduced to 68,634,100.
Thank you all and
Thank you.
happy holidays.
Thank
Okay.
you, Jordan. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, let's move on and we can do all the thank yous in the end. All right, do we have Mr. Steinhauser?
Hi, good morning.
Oh.
Liv McCraw with Ryan.
Okay, are you doing both cases?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, the next case on the agenda is RPC 2500712A at 911 South Scott Street. Ms. McGraw, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property.
Thank you very much and good morning. The subject property is a 247 unit Class B/C apartment building built in 1989 and located in the Penrose submarket of Arlington, somewhat west of Pentagon City. I'd first like to again thank the assessor for giving this one a second look and making some revisions based on the actual INE submitted. The comparisons, of course, can be found on page 5 of 326. And then beginning on page 223 of 326 of the appellate documentation, this kind of gives our initial summary of the issues and our initial pro forma to derive our indicated value of $71,215,000. But just beginning, the assessor did make revisions to her market rent and other income to align more with year-end 2023 actuals, which we do appreciate. Despite these adjustments, however, the revised NOI that the assessor comes to, which can be found in column F of the revision column of 5.1 million, is still approximately 280,000 above both year-end 22 and year-end 2023 actual INE submissions. And this is primarily due to the applied vacancy and collection loss ratio. We understand that the guidelines, point to a stabilized vacancy figure of 6%. This figure is normally not adjusted. However, at this subject property, it did average 11% vacancy throughout calendar year 2023. Based on the submitted year-end 23 income and expense, the income loss just due to vacancy and collection and concessions was almost 14%. As well as the bad debt totaled about 101,000. As of 1/1/24, the physical vacancy at the subject property was 8.8%, about 22 of the 247 units. And because the guidelines just point to a 6% stabilized vacancy, really no allowances for similar to office for like a tiered system of vacancy. The resulting EGI figure that the assessor comes to of 6.7 million is well above actual year in 2023 of 6.4 million, as well as 2022 of 6.2 million. But again, we do appreciate the assessor making some adjustments within other income and PGI, but we still believe that due to this vacancy at the subject property, which is above market, some further adjustments should be required. Additionally, our second and final adjustment has been discussed in previous cases, so I won't harp too far on it. But we do believe that an upward adjustment to the base cap rate based on both market conditions as well as recent sales, which we have discussed in previous cases, should be applied here. Again, over the past 18 months, as of the date of value, the market did change substantially based on the Fed increasing interest rates by around 550 basis points, as well as PwC investor surveys specifically indicating cap rate increases around between 45 to 70 basis points. However, Arlington County did only increase cap rates around 10 basis points, which we do not feel is reflective of the market, as well as recent sales. As discussed previously, Jasper Columbia Pike and the Point at Falls Church do indicate base caps in the 5.5 to 6% range. These are both Class A apartment buildings. This particular subject property is considered more of a Class B/C. And so kind of within these market, in light of these market changes, with the recent sales in calendar year 2023, right around our date of value, we did increase the base cap rate to 5.5%. Again, this subject property is not a Class A, it's more Class B/C. With these sales, with the increase in cap rates, increase in interest rates just in the market, we don't believe that the assessor's changes in the guidelines go far enough. The subject property, with the revised indicated value by the assessor around 88 million, it's pretty much stayed flat from last year. Although we do know the vacancy, the actual physical vacancy remained fairly constant from 22 to 23. The actual income loss due to vacancy and collections did increase from 22 to 23. And beyond that, the actual market environment with the rising interest rates do indicate higher cap rates, even higher than the 10 basis points that were applied by the county. So we do think some further changes should be made here to both account for the changing market, as well as reflect the actual sales that indicate base cap rates in the 5.5 to 6% range. As well as there are some EGI and NOI changes, whereas the property has demonstrated a fairly constant NOI of 4.8 million for the previous 2 years, and the assessor is coming in around almost 300,000 above that. So with that, I again thank the assessor for the revised changes, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Roskin for the county, please.
Thank you, board. Okay, so as you can see on column F, we did, I did take a look at the excess vacancy, and the rent roll showed physical vacancy of 7.7%. And we're using a stabilized vacancy rate of 6%. So in this case, I lowered the rent for the rental rent for this particular property. And when you follow down along, we're fairly in line with what the agent is thinking that the rental income should be. We go further down and you take a look. I said, okay, what's going on with the expenses? And I said, all right, so the last couple of years we've got expenses. So I went with the expenses that were being reported. As for the cap rate, once again, you've heard the argument before. Our cap rates fall within the range that PwC is reporting, our cap rates are the third quarter PwC. We do not get fourth quarter. They fall within that range of the 3.75 to 8%. Our cap rates are still well supported. I also want to note that the reason why we're missing the income and expense statement for 2021 is because the property sold for 110 million. And I looked at that and I said, okay, so it's sold for 110 million. So what's happening with the revenue of this property? The revenue continues to go up since it sold for 110 million. But once again, I said, okay, let's take a look at that excess vacancy. And if you'll note, column F, we come up with a revised value of 88,094,700. And I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, very quick. This is for the applicant. The vacancy rate seems abnormally high for this particular project. What's going on with that?
It is high. It's kind of located in a lesser, not as desirable location. They are trying to keep up with the new properties coming online. So as units are vacated, they have about a 2-week long project where they're kind of keeping it up to date. So a little more higher than normal downtime in between units, but they are kind of churning these out, updating the units as quickly as possible to get them back online. But I think that it's just not in the Clarendon, kind of Pentagon City, Crystal City area. So they're trying to keep up with, you know, the newer online properties here.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Matzkin?
I'd like to follow up on that question. This is for the department. In column E, it's reported vacancy concessions of 13.4%, but I heard you say in your 8 minutes that the vacancies were 7.8%. What's the difference between the 13.4 and 7.8?
On the summary page, I noted that in the comments section that the physical vacancy is 7.7%.
Right, physical. Thank you. You did say that, meaning that there were some apartments that were not occupied, but rent was being collected. Is that what you're saying?
On December 31st, that day, there was 7.7% physical vacancy.
Okay, so the 13.4, that was reported by the appellant to you.
Right, and as she stated, and when we did our inspection, that they are taking units offline to renovate them, completely renovate them. And I was trying to find my notes that showed how many they had renovated. 65% of the community has been renovated. And
So
that's why that number is being reported high. That's why the numbers, and they stated it was 2.5 weeks, or the property manager stated 2.5 weeks to 30 days. The units are down while they do their renovation.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Other questions? No? All right, Ms. Roskin, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Sure. Once again, I just was looking at this when I did the revision. And when you go back to 2020, you're looking at the revenue that they're generating for the apartment, what they reported for 2020. And then the next year they sold for 110 million. Based on that 2020 revenue. And then I took a look at the 2022 and the 2023, and you could see the revenue is increasing. So they're starting to lease back up again. Yes, the vacancy rate is high because once again, they're in the process of renovating all of these units. And it's not just a simple carpet and paint. They're doing cabinetry, they're doing countertops, they're doing the whole thing. And so I took into account for the excess vacancy, lowered the rent, And I matched their, best I could, their expenses. And we came up with a revised value of 88,094,700. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. McGraw, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, thank you. Just a small comment on the sale. I mean, that was before, again, as mentioned in March of 2022, the Fed did increase interest rates by 550 basis points. So we just assumed that the cap rate used for the sale in 2021 would not be feasible in today's market. Again, just like to point to the higher income loss due to vacancy and collections. Again, they are renovating these units as quickly as possible once they are vacated and hoping to lease these as quickly as possible. So there may be higher vacancy in the interim, but the assessor is still coming in at a NOI figure of 5.1 million that has not been achieved in the previous 2 years, as well as 2020. And as well as its assessment, the revised assessment of 88 million, again, to reiterate, is pretty much in line with last year. But as we know, cap rates have increased substantially based on the market, as indicated by recent sales. The assessor even increased cap rates around 10 basis points, which we do believe should have been higher. But even with that increase in cap rates, the revised assessment is still about the same as last year, despite the NOI pretty much staying the same. So we do believe that based on the market changes, this assessment should be lower than last year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. All right, it's just among the board. Where are folks? Mr. Penaranda?
Yeah, the only thing I looked at is the expenses, to recognize that, you know, as they're doing all the repairs and all the renovations and all that, I think the county used 27% on the original assessment. So I made that adjustment on the revised, and it's not an amount that was not achieved before. So it comes up to about 1.8 on the expenses, increasing to 27%, and that would bring the final value to 84,617,300. To me, that's a little more realistic, considering that, you know, the values have gone down a little bit, and the income is increasing. I agree with the county. I think the income is going to be still going up. So yeah, that's where I am.
Hi, Mr. Matzkin.
I'm sorry, Jose. You increased. I mean, the money they're spending is capital improvement, but you increased the operating expenses. Could you repeat that, please? I must have missed something.
I increased the expenses to 27%. That's what the county had used originally, and I don't think that's an amount that is unrealistic. I mean, it was. If you look at 2020, it's an amount that was already even above that, the 1.8 that I'm estimating right now. So the GPI, the EGI, I think, you know, they're both pretty much in line, and I'm okay with that. You know, to me, that was the only difference, that maybe an adjustment should be made. But other than that, I mean, to be honest, I could be with the adjustment on the expenses, or the revised. Doesn't look bad to me.
I'd like to add a counterpoint that the department mentioned, and you see it in column F, that the rental income went down year over year, according to the test, the revision. I would think that might overtake Jose's look at increasing expenses. The original expenses, 27%, were, you know, much higher than the information that the county had as of 2022, before the, you know, 2023 data. So I unusually don't support Jose's position for that reason, and for the fact that the rental income came down. So I kind of like what's found in column F.
Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, I find myself in the rare position of arguing with Jose for a higher assessed value. I kind of agree with Ken's analysis, and And I looked at this and I tinkered around with some adjustments, but I think the 27% is high. And I recognize that this is going through a slow-paced renovation. And it sounds like the majority of it's now completed. And I think that Lori's done a good job. And I'm good with the revised 88,094,700.
Mr. Mendez.
I would agree with the revision as well. I just compared column F and G, and it looks like the appellant is higher everywhere but the expenses, but they reported what 1.6 or so, which is what the county used in the revision. So I would go with the revision.
Yeah, I'll just say I thought the NOI was a little high for what had been achieved, but agree exactly with what Mr. Mendez just said. With the exception of the expenses, the appellant's number, I mean, you can't argue with that. So when you adjust for the expenses, you're getting right back into the same territory where the county is on the revision. So, Mr. Yates?
I agreed with the revision that renovations are near done. They're collecting more revenue. That's what's moving the revenue. At the time, they were 65% done. If I wrote that down right, this revenue is moving up.
All right. Would somebody like to make a motion then? Mr. Matskin?
I move that we accept the department's revision for an evaluation of $88,094,700.
A second.
Okay, motion and a second by Mr. Lawson. All in favor? Aye, opposed? Okay, it is unanimous. The county's revised number of 88,094,700 has been confirmed. Thank you, Ms. Ruskin. Okay, and we have Mr. Chicas. Okay, and the final case for the year, RPC 3402702A at 2600 Crystal Drive. Ms. McGraw, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property.
Yes, thank you very much. The subject property is a 412 unit high-rise apartment building located in the National Landing submarket, specifically Crystal City. Again, I'd like to first state that we do appreciate Chris giving this one a second look as well, based on our submissions. And as previously stated, again, the revisions can be found on page 4, but our initial, I'm lost in the PDF, our initial submission does start on page 63 of 156. But basically, again, just going through the revisions here, Chris has really done a great job with adjusting based on the actual INE submitted. Our apartment PGI is the exact same as Chris. What has changed is with the parking and other income, we're just a little bit off there. In the previous case, Lori did just take kind of what actually was submitted versus Chris here has gone just a little bit higher than actual. So we're coming in with parking income of $798,000 and other income of $400,000 versus Chris's $825,000 and $450,000. So just a small change there with the GPI, but could be significant once capitalized. But moving down with vacancy and collection, kind of mentioned in the previous case, we did something different here. We understand again that the county is kind of contained within the actual guideline vacancy of 6%. This subject property as of 1/1/24 was only 93% occupied, so approximately 7% vacant as of the date of value. Instead of making some adjustments to account for this vacancy as we did in the previous case to the market rents, we've instead just increased the vacancy and collection loss ratio from 6% as indicated by the guidelines to 7.5%. So this is really the main reason why we differ here. As submitted on the actual rent roll as of 1/1/24, the actual market rents are about 100,000 less than what we've actually applied in our pro forma. So again, instead of just adjusting the market rents here, we've instead opted to adjust the vacancy and collection loss ratio to align more with the actual physical vacancy of the subject property, instead, again, as adjusting the market rents. Again, as previously stated in the case before, and then in other cases, we've also made an adjustment to the base cap rate based on both investor surveys as well as actual market activity. Again, interest rates since March of 2022 have increased, and we believe just the 10 basis points adjustment from 2022 to 2023 that the county has applied doesn't go far enough to kind of reflect these market changes, as well as, again, the sales that have occurred in the county of Jasper, Columbia Point, and then the Point at Falls Church. Both near our data value and both indicate cap rates in the base 5.5 to 6% range. And just at the end of the day, even the revised assessment figure of around 165 million is about almost a 5% increase from last year to this year. Nothing has substantially changed at the subject property from last year to this year, and we know that interest rates have increased from the last year to this year. The assessor, as we've seen, does keep up with NOI very well in revised calculations as well as initial assessments, but again, we believe that they haven't kept up with the interest rate changes and the resulting cap rate changes that we've seen in the market. So again, we would ask the board to consider an increase to the base cap rate, as well as maybe some adjustments where we differ in our actual market rent versus vacancy and collection loss adjustment that we've applied. So with that, I'll give it over to Chris, but thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas for the county, please.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, board members. Good morning, Ms. McCrohan. So primarily, we're going to be looking upon the summary sheet, as the board is familiar with my approach. In looking at the numbers that were submitted with the I&E for 2023, you can see in column H, we did reach out to the appellant, unfortunately a bit late in the process, having received this a bit late. What we did ask was the common area exterior repairs of just over 300,000, some miscellaneous repairs of 585,000, and other admin costs of approximately 300,000. Unfortunately, they weren't able to get back to us before we were to have this package submitted and sent out for covenants and for the packages to be set in time for the BOE hearing. But what we did was essentially infer a bit based on previous year's confirmations of what we considered capital expenditures and or owner expenses. As you can see in reconstructions for columns B, D, and F were for years 2020, 2021, and 2022. As you can see in the comment field, we believe there's approximately $1.9 million in items considered capital improvements and or expenditures that would either prolong the life of the building and or expect a return on investment regarding income levels. One thing we did note, regardless of the our inability to get answers to the questions posed, as you can see again in column H, operating year 2023, as reported by the owner, apartment rents alone were up almost 4%. Gross potential income was up almost 4%. Effective gross income was up almost 3%, 2.5%. So while again, we disagree with the operating expenses as reported in column H, you can see that the column estimated a reconstruction in column I. That would be again what was reported in column H minus the questionable expenses that we feel needed further examination. Regardless, you can see that the estimation is still a good almost 9% higher than what was reported and reconstructed for column, operating year 2022. Please note in our revision for operating year 2024, we actually project up another 1% on top of our reconstructed estimate for year 2023. That the 3.7 million mark for OpEx is higher than had been reported as far as any of the reconstructions that we have. So again, we are definitely keeping up with the idea that operating expenses tend to grow a little bit year over year. Please note as well that our projections for income are well below what's been achieved the last 2 years. Again, growth of almost 4% in 2022 for gross potential, and over 9% for effective gross. And again, 4% growth for gross potential in 2023, just shy of 2.5% effective gross. The county's projections respectively are 1.9% for gross potential and 1.5% for effective gross. Again, very much keeping in pace with what's going on at the property as far as rents being achieved and occupancy at the property itself. Please note again, as Ms. McCall noted herself, even though the occupancy reported at 93%, we noted that the rents actually went up almost 4%, even though occupancy actually tricked up 1.4%, 1.1%. So again, indications are strong that the rents being achieved more than make up for the projections, modest projections made by the county. Given the lack of transparency, and I shouldn't really phrase it that way, given the lack of answers to questions posed by the owners, I would note that these are fairly innocuous questions, follow up on things such as, again, reports of common area expenses. This was 2022, they reported over $1 million in common area repairs. And again, another 500,000 or so this year. So we did have questions. We weren't able to get responses. Please note that the revisions and projections that we made are again very much keeping in not only with percentage of gross potential, but also again occupying the operating expenses that are percentage of effective gross, over almost 28.5% of effective gross. Again, a very modest 1% increase for NOI projection. Please note that our revised opinion of value is 4.2% increase over last year. Again, very much keeping up with what you've seen all year, the success of National Landing. And again, very much in pulse of what's going on at the property as opposed to the negative 11% requested by the appellant. All this being said, we do believe the county's recommended revision of $165,382,700 should be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you both. Questions from board members? Mr. Matzkin.
Easy one for the department. When did you request this information about this seemingly higher operating expenses for last year that you didn't get responses to?
Absolutely. I believe you can see that on page 5. I think what this was initially reached out on Wednesday, October 9th. Mr. Yanoti replied that he would have questions, hope to have questions by end of the week. I reached back out that Friday, the 11th, and nothing. And then at that point, I mentioned if they could just send us their internal accounting as they had done in previous years, we could use that and get the answers ourselves. But at that point, we needed to process the case.
All right, thanks.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chikas, if you would take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, ma'am. So again, primarily based upon the summary sheet and looking at the revision columns, please note our projections made for apartment rent revenue is almost 2.6% less than what was achieved last year. Our gross potential revenue projections are less than half of what was achieved last year. And our effective gross projections are full 1% less than what was achieved last year. So you can see our operating expenses are very much in line. Again, if you look at the reconstructed columns, which take out CapEx and owner expenses, we do believe that our revised projection for NOI, which is 1% over what was achieved last year in the estimated column, again, is very much in line with what's going on to the property. A very modest 4% increase year over year, much more in line with the property as opposed to a negative 11% drop. Please confirm our revised recommendation of $165,382,700. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. McGraw, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, thank you. Again, I'd just like to point out that based on the calendar year 2023 INE as compared to the calendar year 2022 INE, the NOI pretty much stayed the exact same at 9.2 million. Just despite that, the assessment from last year to this year, based on the revised figures, did increase 4%, almost 5%. And that's, again, in light of pretty stable, constant NOI, did not grow from year to year, as well as we know the interest rate has increased over the years and cap rates have increased. So we ask that in light of this information, in light of the market changes, as well as the NOI staying pretty much flat, this figure should at least be more in line with last year, if not lower, based on the market changes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. All right, it's just among the board. Where's everybody on this? Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start us, I guess. I looked up just kind of as a check on what the county did. I looked up how much have apartment rents gone up in Arlington, and it's 4.5%. And I did a little bit of math. It ends up around 166 million, thereabouts. Chris said he went up 4.2%. And, given that expenses are going up too, as well as rent, I'm good with the revised figure.
Okay, other folks? Mr. Metzger?
The 1 minute wrap up from the appellant, absent the cap rate argument, is exactly right. I mean, everything's pretty much tracks from 23 to 24. I was surprised that the bottom line valuation wasn't 1% or 1.25% or something, but rather 4.8. But the numbers are the numbers, and so I come out with there was no dramatic changes anywhere except for the in the expenses or the income. I'm repeating myself, I think, on purpose. So given my surprise, nonetheless, I support it.
Okay, anyone else? Mr. Yates?
I'm good with the revised. I tried to bounce back and forth over time and see where things are off. I think it's in line, as the project should be, the property.
Okay, Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, I'll give a final comment. I do think that given where interest rates were temporarily, I hope that perhaps an adjustment to the cap rate should have been made, but we decided as a group not to go there some time ago. And so I've been basing my analysis on the residential apartments pretty much without considering a cap rate change from what the county came up with.
Okay, well, it looks like we are all in agreement here with nods of head. So would somebody like to make a motion?
I'll motion we accept the revised.
Okay, I will second that. All in favor?
Mhm.
Aye, opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. The county's revised number of 165,382,700 has been confirmed. That completes the agenda for today, actually for the calendar year. So thank you, everybody. And we will stand adjourned here at 10:45 and reconvene sometime next April.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
And can the board members stay on for a second? Just for some light